Welcome to What's on the Menu, where you can tune in live on Boston Praise Radio 102.9 FM or what'sonthemenuboston.com, Boston Praise Radio and TV.com, Facebook and YouTube. We air live every first and third Sundays of the month. This week's conversation, Black on Black Crime. And here's your host, Tracy Lithcutt.
Oh, here we go. We didn't get anything smart out of you today, huh? I don't get a smart name today. Just my regular name, Tracy Lithcutt, is in the house here today on What's on the Menu. And yes, we are here to talk about black on black crime. But before we get started, I hope folks realize the last couple of weeks we've been doing some replays because we were out of town and out of the country vacationing. I had an opportunity to go to Barbados for a week. It was wonderful. The food was wonderful. The black folk were wonderful. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. It was a good time. A lot of beach weather. Good food. That's what makes a good vacation. And I went to the gym 5 days. Can't believe that one. Today, we're going to talk about black on black crime, but my man James Jizzy Levesque is not here today. I'm going to let my panelist introduce himself since he's sitting in the second seat today. He's a common occurrence on this show. He gives a excellent perspective. And why don't you introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are?
Well, Tracy, I'm glad you enjoyed your vacation. And Reverend Wall, it's a pleasure to see you again. Hi, I'm Horace Small, and I'm the Executive Director of the Union Minority Neighborhoods in Boston.
Horace is here today. We have a very small, intimate panel today, as you see. We're missing one of our folks. I'm not going to mention his name because he's always consistent. He must be hopefully stuck in traffic. Our producer, Cheryl Spence, will hopefully give her perspective. She's over there grinning like I don't know what. Like she doesn't know what she's talking about, but she's here today. So Horace, let's go into this. Let's just talk about black on black crime. You know what? I've been doing this work for so many years, and I just don't understand the outrageous levels that we go to in our community. Let's just back this up. What's going on with our community, Horace? Black people, one thing that I noticed, black people seem very angry. I'm a person that when I'm out in the community, I speak to everyone. I don't care, young, old. The other day there was a woman, she was homeless, sitting in a wheelchair, and I just stopped, had a conversation with her. But everybody just seems on guard and so angry. Well, what's going on, Horace?
I think, that, Tracy, there's a lot of perspectives in which to look from. I mean, if you look nationally, let's start with Trump. Trump has brought a perspective of anger, and he's made anger and hate popular. He is his racism, his antics, and the people that support him have sent many messages to not just black folks, but to Latinos, to immigrants, to lots of people, creating even more of a class division that exists. Locally and nationally. I think.
So you really believe that Trump's a racist?
Oh, of course he is. Of course he is. And so is his father. All right? So not just that, he came from the guy is he's a grifter. He came from a corporate enterprise started by his grandfather, and he's where he is today. And he's brought tremendous, look at what he did to Elijah Cummings. Look at what he said about Baltimore. I mean, this man is a racist. Look at what he said about Charlottesville. And that permeates into everything else we do. Also look at...
But so you're saying that we should blame Trump for the issues of the black community.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
Those issues were there long before he got there.
What I am saying is that he has made hate, he has made racism, he has made inequality, he has made all these things popular. I mean, not just that, he has done it with a base of people who are as poor as we are.
Sure.
They bought the hype. So you have him. You have our local governments. I mean, for years and years and years, Pastor Wall has been saying that we have a crisis in our community, and no one pays attention. My argument is that there has not been, we don't have, when you look at our political power, when you look at the people who represent us, we don't have much to show for it. We really don't. We don't have much to show from leadership. We elect people What is your plan to do something about violence? What is your plan to do something about black-on-black crime? And there's nothing that comes out
You know,
of it.
and I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I really thought about regarding the black community is that we have no national leader. Who is somebody that the black community would point at and say, that's our leader? And
There isn't anybody. There isn't anybody. And when in reality, I think, Tracy, what we have always been, for instance, when we talk about the Boston Miracle, yeah, the black ministers got credit for it, but really, brother, do you really think that a bunch of preachers stop violence in the city of Boston? No, it takes a community to do that.
That's right.
It takes engaged mothers and fathers. It takes those town watch people, those weird folks walking the streets with walkie-talkies. It takes the block leaders. It takes those folks. So collectively, that's how violence is addressed.
Sure.
So I don't know whether or not we need an Al Sharpton or a Jesse Jackson. I do think what we need is a reincarnation or redevelopment of the development of new black leaders.
Sure.
Okay, when you look
Sure.
at, like, I'm 66, Chuck is what, 74. I'm not even gonna get into how old you are, Pastor. Okay.
71, you look good, brother. You look good.
Yeah, and you got this gray hair on your head.
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't know how
57.
old
I'm
you are.
57.
Right. And the point is that, like, these are the fights that we have fought. He has fought the fight of addressing violence and gang violence. I did that in Philadelphia. In fact, that was my job. We did that.
Sure.
And the dilemma is that, we haven't really taken the time to develop new leaders, sharing that history so
Sure.
that they understand this piece. And then conversely, there's also, like, the failure of state and local government.
Sure.
Okay, we have the thing I get such a big kick out of.
But you know what though? I always hear that in not being defensive at all, because I work for local government, but not at all. I think we're out there, but it's historically, government can only do so much,
And that's true.
The community has to begin to take ownership for some of the
No doubt.
mishaps and mistakes that have occurred. And I want to kind of take this back. And I think when we think about black on black crime, we really think about guns, murders, homicides, yellow tape in our community. Why do our young kids have to get up in the morning, go to school, and see yellow tape all across in front of their homes and in the walkways?
And you're right, and they shouldn't.
How did this start? How did
Well-
people say, oh, gangs got together and they were protecting each other from each other, and the breakdown has to be much worse than that, because it has to be somebody's son that's out there.
We've had a proliferation of this behavior since the 50s, when Pastor Wall's 71 years old. So I'm not going to speak for Pastor Wall, but I would tend to think he remembers the days when the gangs used to have, we'll have a fair one.
Sure.
It was the hands. It was, the zip guns. It was like nothing that was running around killing people. And as we got further into the 70s, it got more and more pronounced.
More advanced.
And then in the 80s, a lot of things we don't talk about. History is really important. And so when we got into the 80s, when we got into the drug stuff, all right, remember how we got there. We got there, all of a sudden, magically, Ronald Reagan was fighting a war in Honduras.
Sure.
Right, with the Iran-Contra. Okay, he gets Oliver North. The CIA comes up, I'm jumping ahead of myself. The Congress voted against supplying him money to fight this war in Central America. So what did they do? They came up with a strategy using the CIA to put, and it's a fact, and people could look it up. I'm not making this up. They used the CIA to put cocaine,
Sure.
put crack into the communities. Drug gangs proliferated, and we had this problem that manifested itself to the point where
Couldn't control
you
it.
couldn't control it. And with the government looking the other way, right?
Sure.
Looking the other way and saying that, well, these communities are out of control. To this day, we still have government that has the conversation like, oh my God, we have to come up with money, for summer jobs.
Sure.
Because these people have been programmed into thinking that somehow our black kids, if they don't have a summer job by June 30th, they magically turn into predators and start eating people.
Right.
So it's, and we haven't had, and just the only thing that I promise I'll shut up.
No. You're the only one here. I need you to keep talking, brother. Come on now.
The only other thing, Tracy, that I find at fault with how the city addresses these issues, or the state, is that, there's something to be said about grassroots people. There's something to be said about the woman who lives on the 200 block of Warren Street who wants to do something in the community. Instead of coming up with this process of let's bring in all the super Negroes, let's bring in all the smart people, let's bring in all our folks from Harvard, and let's plot and strategize and
research and data this problem
away.
Right.
And this is, and Pastor Wall's trip for the last 15 years is that it ain't doing nothing.
Sure.
We have all these strategies going on, but there is no implementation of any plan. And the dilemma is, if we learned anything from the Boston Miracle, if we learned anything from that, it takes a community to address issues of violence.
Well, one thing about the Boston Miracle, because I was definitely a major player in that initiative, we came to realize that there were only a small group of individuals and programs that really work with this particular population.
Right.
So my question is, what are the organizations, the national organizations, the local organizations doing to help their own community with this problem? It reminds me, a friend of mine, when I go to visit him in New York, we're driving through the Bronx or Brooklyn or somewhere, and he says, you look a little nervous. Right. You're from Boston. I know you're a little nervous in New York. Don't be nervous. These are your people. Just joking. But, this is a real issue where folks from our community will not do anything at times to lift their fingers towards some of the violence that's going on in our community.
I think you have to...
As well as the organizations.
Well, I think... Let me suggest that I don't think there are a lot of organizations who've taken this on as a priority. I don't think they have. I think, considering now that who we have as president and the
back to Trump, bro. Back to Trump.
Yeah. I mean, you got to go there.
Blame it on the guy we call the
racist. No. You have to go there and allow me to explain, because the dilemma is, when he became president, social programs, he cut everything.
True.
He cut everything from. I mean, he's cut food stamps to virtually nothing. He's cut payments to folks on welfare. He's cut everything. He's cut services for people who need lawyers. He's cut everything, and and one of the challenges for a lot of nonprofits is that, I mean, if truth be told, we're driven by funding.
Sure. But and this directs me right into a number of questions. I want to jump back a little bit because I know we're going to come back to this. So I remember years ago, I'm out working with these guys involved with gangs and guns, and how it affects the community. It brings property values down. Grandmothers and grandfathers can't walk to the stores. Younger kids can't use the parks because of stray bullets. It affects everything. Should there or could there be a controlled effort? In other words, I was at a point with the young boys on the block, I really didn't care what they were doing in regards to the drug game. I just wanted them to stop shooting. So that way people wouldn't die, and you could go to where you needed to go and feel safe about doing it. Should we take a blind eye to certain things if we can get some type of agreement to stop the shootings from happening?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I think about when I think about how violence was dealt with back in the day, I think about how the 90s. There were efforts to, I know in Philadelphia, where I'm from, we got an assault weapons ban passed and a Saturday night special ban passed, and it actually saved people's lives for about 17 months until the NRA went to the legislature and had it overthrown. Mm-hmm. But it saved lives. It made a difference. I mean, but the thing is, we did things. We allowed community people to bring their unique spear or game into the problem and allowed them to play.
Sure.
I mean, and what happened was Republicans would make fun of this stuff. Midnight basketball, as much as they hated the idea, that stuff worked.
Sure.
That stuff worked.
Sure. But I know one thing.
Yeah.
If I see another basketball tournament or league that's supposed to stop violence, I swear to God, I'm going to choke myself. I say to myself, is this the only thing we can do? I do tournaments after tournaments, which are good. They are good. It engages. But we've got to get to the root of the problem and really deal with that.
But that was just part of it. That was one aspect of it. There were a number of tactics. Communities began to organize block by block. right?
Sure.
You know, they began to organize block by block. They began to start bringing in some of the drug dealers.
Sure.
Okay, because one of the things the drug dealers do, and I can't speak for Boston, but I know in Philadelphia, they were doing things like they were a critical part of the community.
Sure,
They were doing things like if Mrs. Johnson couldn't pay her electric bill, they'd send one of their people out to pay for it. There were reasons why when drug dealers got shot and killed, there were 10,000 people at the funeral. There were reasons for it.
Sure.
So one of the challenges was we had to win people back. So that meant putting money into neighborhoods. So if Mrs. Wilberforce wants to have kids over to the house every day to do Bible study and give them, you know, candy and juice and stuff afterwards, there was money for that.
Sure. And, you know, I want to throw this out to people in the community as well. You know, the public school system, they're definitely trying. I think they do a wonderful job educating our kids. I think it's the responsibility of parents to be more engaged and make sure that when their children do leave school, that they are doing what they should do after school to prepare for the next day. But there are enough people that live in communities, whether you have children or not. You know what? Why don't you all get together, put a little money together? If the student doesn't have all the supplies they need, help pitch in, help buy books, help do whatever you can to push education for these individuals. And this is why we have to step up and support one another, and there are creative ways of doing it. But my question, Horace,
like for instance,
let me just ask you this question.
Sure.
Why is this only happening in the black community?
Oh, it's not happening. It's not just only happening in the
I
black
mean,
community.
all over the country, this is a black, homicides like this, youth-related homicides is a black community problem.
There is a Central American problem with gangs all over the country.
I'm talking about in this country. I'm talking about
I
here.
said in this country. There
Sure.
are Central American gangs. You have, in East Boston, there are Central American gangs.
Yeah,
They're
but
killing people. You have Vietnamese gangs killing people.
Those numbers are extremely low. If you looked at
no argument.
Yeah, extremely low compared to the black community.
No argument.
Why have we allowed this? Why is this happening?
I don't think
in this room alone, the strength that we have in this room with black folks wanting to do positive things, how is this small population of folks affecting our community so badly? And once again, it seems to be a black community issue.
I can share what I've studied in Boston and what I've learned. One of the challenges that we have to have is we have to, and I think there's some people, and you guys have been part of that challenge, is to develop some concept of unity and awareness among black leadership.
Sure.
We have black leaders who are real. We have black leaders who are imagined. We have black leaders who think they are. You know, but in order to to prioritize, right? I mean, if we were to look at, you know, if we were to say what's the genesis of all this, one can make the argument poverty. Poverty is, we have families that don't know where they're going to live from one day to the next. We have families who are dysfunctional. We have men not involved. So we have, you know, all the subliminal effects that come from poverty. And we have not come up with any level of strategic planning or thinking that we can actually, we're expecting legislators, we're expecting Marty Walsh, we're expecting Governor Baker to deal with this problem. When Baker lives in Swampscott. Okay? He's rich. It don't bother him.
Sure.
Right? You know, he's trying to figure out how to kill vapes. Right? That's his trip right now.
But we got to be honest. Come on, when someone dies, it definitely affects any legislator. But I want to go back
when
to
someone
this.
dies, the strategy that we have had over the years is somebody dies, we go out in the street, we stand in the street, somebody prays, and like we put up, you know, like balloons, and you know. Is that a strategy? I would argue no.
Sure.
I would argue no. I would argue that, like, if we recognize that the summer is a huge problem, and if the summer is a critical component for, like, for instance, July and August is usually the periods of time when all the death and dying goes on. So if we already know that, why haven't we challenged law enforcement to sit down and work with community into developing neighborhood strategies to deal with this violence issue? For instance, right, if you live in, I don't know the police precinct 13, right, what is the strategy for community people to become engaged, to sit down and work with community folks.
See, but
Accountability.
law enforcement does that, Horace. They do that. I think that once again, I'm bringing it back around.
But no. I disagree. I don't think they do a job well enough.
Wow.
I don't think law enforcement is our friends. I've never believed that for 1 minute.
Really?
No, I don't believe that at all.
Okay,
Now, I don't think there's a
okay.
lot of black people who do. There's enough stuff going on in this country right now with police officers that should give people reason to pause about how they care about
Cheryl,
black community.
did you want to say something,
I
Cheryl?
want to say that I have some FBI statistics that says 90.1% of black victims of homicide were killed by other blacks,
Right.
while 83.5% of whites were killed by other whites. Is it just that white-on-white crime isn't talked about?
But I think that the key now is what are the numbers? How many black people are killed nationally compared to how many black people are killed nationally compared to white people? And then what are those ages between like 15 and 24? What are those numbers like I would assume that those numbers are much larger. But once again, what is the role? Why is this happening in our community and not in others? I'm going to throw it right out there. What is the role of the black man? Where are the brothers here? I don't care if you're with the mother anymore, if you don't get along with her, there's no way in the world that you brothers, uncles, whoever you might be, godfathers, should allow your sons, nephew, whatever they might be, to be out on those street corners. The black man has to play some responsibility.
I agree.
In my opinion, I think the black woman, she can't do it all. She can't do it all. She's trying to do the family. She's trying to do the community. And once again, even if you don't have children, black men should speak up to the boys in their communities and try to provide other resources.
Who can deny that? That's absolutely true.
So where are the brothers?
Well,
Reverend Wall, where's the black man? Where's the black man in this whole crisis that's occurring right now nationally with young blacks? Horace, go ahead. Reverend Wall is not ready for it.
I think it goes back to this is my thinking. My thinking is, and Pastor Wall's been involved in, well, you too, Tracy. Y'all been involved with this since the 80s, right? So you get it. And we have implemented a number of different strategies. And one of the things that has happened over the years is that things have proliferated. Things have gotten worse. I remember when back in the 90s it was a Glock. Now it's an AK, right? These are the things that we had to deal with. And before the Glock, it was a 38, right? So that we've had to deal with this for a long time. And the challenge is now that if we look at and do the analysis, if we're honest with ourselves, we can look at it and say this has gotten worse. Absolutely, black men need to be involved. And I think there's an effort that's going on right now that you were actually quite helpful for. Thank you very much. Getting black men together. They call themselves Black Men in Massachusetts.
Sure.
Bud Williams, who's a state rep from Springfield, is one of the proponents of this. But the point is, before they can actually play, they're growing. They have to learn how to be. They have to learn how to be engaged and involved in community.
Sure.
They have to learn how to be activists. They have to learn how to be organizers. They have to learn how to put themselves in the street. We remember back in the 90s that when folks were doing this stuff, remember with schools, we used to have safety zones. Right? In 4 blocks in every direction, there were going to be people. Senior citizens were
Sure.
really good folks to do that stuff.
Absolutely.
To make sure that people were safe. In that 4-block radius, north, south, east, and west, we had safe houses if people were being threatened.
Sure.
We had places to go. We had strategies. It's time for us to go back to that because, we can't expect, as much as I critique Mayor Walsh, as much as I critique the governor, we really can't say that much until we begin to start. But what is our 5-point plan to deal with this?
Sure.
What is our 7-point plan? How much will it cost? Who will we involve? How do we build community around?
But it's a real issue when you're having a problem in a community, and black folks won't even come to the meetings to participate. And I've definitely heard Reverend Wall.
And that's an important point. I mean, the important point is that people don't believe anymore.
Are we scared of our own people, or are we angry at each other? Do black folks hate each other?
No, I think it's more of an opinion that people believe that nothing will ever change. And somehow we have to go about and we have to change that attitude. We have to change that reality. After all, wait a minute, man. I mean, after all, why do we need why we need community people? We had this super group of preachers that stopped it before, so.
Well, that's it. That's a whole nother story there.
Right, but you understand my point, right?
Sure,
So if you enable people, if you take away their responsibilities, if you say, "Don't worry about it, I got it," then folks aren't going to play.
So let's talk about that. What the role of the church, and I'm going to be, and I'm going to broaden this a little bit. I'm not going to just say the role of the black church, because I've met so many white priests of other denominations that are in the communities. At times doing more than some of the clergy that are right there where the problem exists. Now, I understand not all churches are equipped to do this work. Not all churches have the calling to do this type of work. But what is the role of the black church? Because it's my belief if we pull a community together, it can, even if you're working directly with young men involved in gangs, it still will be a supportive measure that will bring people together that can help decrease crime and violence. So sometimes if you work around issues around it, and then the other issue that I see with that is folks have to feel comfortable when they see something, and I mean whatever it is, small and large, reported to the police. And folks have to do that in partnerships, like rather than just one person going down. When someone's in court, you need to have a whole community of folks to come down.
And remember, back in the 90s, people did that.
Yeah, we need
people did that.
We need more of that. What is the church? Where's the church? Reverend Wall, you got to get on your mic now. I want to hear what the role of the church is in this whole thing.
Leave Reverend Wall alone.
We don't want to get him going. We don't want to get Reverend Wall going.
Your point is well taken. See, everything that, remember, when we were doing all the stuff back in the day, there was one common denominator. There were resources to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And to train people, to have them be the eyes and ears for the community. They had to be taught. They had to be taught how to do it without putting themselves in danger.
Sure.
People had to be taught to bring community, to bring their block, their street, the other 3 blocks around the corner to talk about this stuff. They needed the resources. And where the church came in, and most of the resources, if you recall, because George Bush wasn't putting a dime out for anything, those resources came from what we used to call the God Box. The God Box was 475 Riverside Drive in New York City.
Okay.
That was the home base of every major denomination of churches in the country. And they all had a philanthropic arm. They all had a grant-making component. And, we got money from this.
But here we go now. So we talked about the black man's role in the community.
Right.
The majority of the black churches are ran by black men, black male pastors. There's not a great deal of women pastors. So for me, that kind of doubles down now. You are a black man. You run a black organization in the community, which is supposed to be one of the strongest foundations in the community. What is your role? Should there be you can't, not everyone is of the same denomination, so you can't have one rule for everyone. But church, what is that role? Does the leadership in churches in the black church see as their role in regards to fighting this? I know that I'm engaged with a number of groups now that are stepping up to the table. I've been engaged with a number of groups over years that have done wonderful work. But it doesn't seem like it's a consistent effort across the board for the church to be actively engaged.
No, it's not. I mean, and it hasn't been from my perspective. And again, you have to invest. If you want change, change has to be invested in. Boston is one of the few cities where black people do not have a philanthropic arm.
Sure.
And they don't give. But what they do is they give to the church.
Sure.
Okay? And in the course of, just think of 10 Point. Just think of 10 Point. Let's go back to 10 Point, right? We had, they were getting funded. They got big money. They got money from the mayor. They got money from foundations. They got money from a bunch of folks. And you even have right now, 2 people who made their mark, on the issue of violence. I mean,
Sure.
Ray Hammond and Greg Groover, both of whom sit on the boards of foundations.
Sure.
Ray sits on 26 boards. I don't know how it's possible to do that, but he does. But that money, but the money that they raised at that time did not go back into supporting the grassroots elements that could have done the work.
Sure.
And even to this day, you still do not have either one of them talking in the philanthropic community, talking to the Boston Foundation, talking to Lottie Dottie, anybody with a check, about we need to come up with some money to put into our neighborhoods. You're concerned about this violence issue, so are we.
Sure.
We need this money back in our communities.
I'm gonna challenge folks in a different direction as well. Like, we need you to get out here and get involved. Sometimes the money is for me is not the number one priority. It's the human capital. We need certain. I don't like using the word role models anymore, but we need folks to come out and to teach and give opportunity in different directions. Not the same old type of, just always volunteering for tutoring, mentoring, but doing other things that are going to help some of these young people move along. And let's not sidestep that high risk to the highest denominator, highest point individual in the community, that high risk gang involved individual. They're nothing but kids also. You have to get out there. You have to speak to them. You can pull them away from negative opportunities and give them resources if you get out there and gain a rapport and develop partnerships. Before we move on, and I'm going to go in a different direction after we hear from our girl, Cheryl Spence, producer extraordinaire. She is going to now try to name all of our sponsors without making a mistake.
All right.
Cheryl.
Here we go. Local sponsors: Urbanica Building Design, Eddie Jenkins Law, Callaway Graphics, Sweet Embers Bakery, J. Rockwell Sound Studio, Shun's Kitchen, Janie Construction, Leo Papil, George Kramer, Suya Joint out of Roxbury, Mass., and some anonymous donors.
Ooh, that's the
I
local.
always do my shout out to Jerry at Leading Ladies, who cuts my hair.
Okay,
My
Jerry.
national sponsors are Better Belly out of Chicago, Illinois, The Shop, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, 8 Pond Concept Productions out of Miami,
Oh, that
Florida.
word didn't sound right. Production?
Productions, yeah.
Productions.
And Campaign Industries out of Chicago, Illinois.
All right, that was 95%. We'll give her a round of applause. She was close.
Right.
She was close, Reverend Wall.
I've been working on it.
So I'm going to make a shift now. So, because there's another thing that when we talk about black on black violence, and I think there's something that we've accepted in our community, and don't really look at it as a violence issue with black against black. Women that are out on the streets, women that involve for folks that don't know the new terminology around prostitution, it's now exploitation or trafficking that it's now called. And we actually have a conference coming up in Boston, a national conference coming up on November 20th. But is it a crime for the community not to do anything with these women, for us to walk by and not give them assistance? Is it a crime for men in our community to purchase sex from these women, knowing that they're in such a vulnerable position in an industry filled with violence?
Is that for Pastor Wall?
No, that's not. That was a good one. No, that's not for Pastor Wall. That's for the layman. We got to keep that on this side of the desk.
Well, I mean, look, there was. I had a dear friend of mine who was a United States Senator and who died in a plane crash in 2002. His name was Paul Wellstone from Minnesota, and he said something. It's something that I live by. He said, you cannot let the life you lead betray the words you speak. So, in other words, walk your talk.
Sure.
I think about this past summer with these brothers that came together over at the mosque, right? Who were patrolling neighborhoods, who were doing that, and were doing it well. Who got no credit, who got no love, and there were hundreds of them. But if you don't have, and I'm gonna keep going back, Trace. I gotta tell you.
Okay. Were we going back to the White House again?
No, we're going back to resources, bro.
Okay.
You have to have a little love. A little love goes a long way. A little love helps. A little finance, helps in the training and the development and the planning, because you just can't be walking the streets all the time.
Sure.
You can't just be walking the streets and talking to kids all the time. You have to have something else to provide them and to give them. And the same thing I would think applies to women. If you live a life that is one of values, then I think you're humanly compelled. Your moral, whether you believe in God or not, your morality suggests that you should do everything in your power to help these sisters, even if they don't want your help.
Sure.
You know, and
not everyone's going to take our help.
And not everyone's going to do it. I mean, and that's exactly right. Have you tried talking to some homeless brothers recently? I know I have.
Sure.
And they're like, look, man, let me take you to the shelter. Like, you know, so,
Sure.
It's basically, I try to walk my talk every day, and I may fall short. And I think that it's critical for black men, particularly when you look on these shows, when you look and read in the paper. These are black women that we're talking about. People keep thinking that this trafficking is like some women from Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
These are people.
Exactly.
These are people from.
This is local,
this
homegrown.
is local and homegrown.
That's right.
And you have, we used to work when we did Korea reform. We used to work with women whose families forced them into the street because that was the way that they got to feed their families. So
Sure.
they turned their daughters into prostitutes.
Wow.
I mean, so there's a whole, resources. We
But,
have
I
a
mean-
whole bunch of mental health issues
But see,
going with this too, bro.
but see, you're going back to the resource piece again. When does it come to a point where we take ownership for this? I mean,
I think people have, but the dilemma is that if you can't keep. Look, it's easy for brothers to walk the streets when it's like 90 degrees out.
Sure.
It's gonna be a lot harder to walk the streets when it's 7 degrees out.
Yeah, but them women are still walking those streets.
And that's exactly
when it's
right.
7 degrees.
And that's exactly right. So, and I don't know. And one of the things that you talked about the idea of the conference, but the national conference. But there hasn't been any that I know of, and I like to think I'm pretty connected to the community. I haven't heard anything on a local level about what do we do with dealing with this problem here.
Yeah,
if all things are local, if
Sure.
if politics is local and organized is local, what have we done here? And I don't even recall. I think Ayanna Pressley years ago had a hearing on it. Mm-hmm. But remember, city council doesn't have the power to.
Sure.
But
we as a community, we as a community do, and it's for me, it's very frustrating that you just can't get the support and backing for our own community. Once again, I don't see a lot of these problems happening in other communities, and then you'll get people.
Right.
You'll get people that'll make statements saying, "Oh, well, if this were the white community, we wouldn't let this they wouldn't let this happen in their community. The police would do this. This group would do that." But you know what, too? Folks would also come outside themselves. I watched Bishop Dickinson, basically stop prostitution up in the area by his church. And not to blame the women because they're victims. What he did was they went after the Johns and embarrassed them, took pictures and their cars and took pictures of them, where now I'm sure that they would move to another area, but it's not a problem for their church anymore.
Then why don't we do something about it?
Something. There you go, Horace. There we go. There you go.
You and Pastor Wall do something.
I agree. I agree.
He has enough. This church has enough cachet. This station has enough cachet.
Did you say cachet or cash?
Cachet. Well,
okay.
No. Look, this man has my profound respect because, look, we don't have any radio stations in Boston.
That's right.
We have this one.
This
is the only one that talks to black people the black community, and it's a struggle every day for him to keep this station open. I have to say, Pastor, I'm profoundly grateful to you for what you do, but I also think I speak for a lot of people when I say that. And with that said, with the respect that he has, I actually think we can pull something together in the next couple months.
I'm working on some issues too around.
While everybody is, look, Dr. King's birthday.
Sure.
While people are running around like going downtown and having a whole bunch of white folks who don't give a darn about Martin Luther King, but acting like they do, okay, for breakfast, and none of us are ever invited. Okay,
two black people care.
Yeah, right. So, maybe what we should be doing for that day is doing some type of gathering, come up with an agenda to deal with how do we talk about trafficking and violence.
Sure.
And violence. Because then we link both of those. Because those women, if they don't bring home the cash that they're supposed to get, they're beat up.
That's right.
They're victims.
It kind of reminds me of this next thing I want to talk about.
So maybe we get Pastor Wall. Pastor Wall, would you be okay with that?
I like the idea of having Dr. King's birthday in all day broadcasting,
Yes.
every hour on the hour, something about the issues in our community.
I like that. I like that.
Let's roll.
And what I really want to do
Now
is
that's what organizing is.
there you
That's
go,
how
baby. There you go.
that's
There
how
you go.
make things
And get
happen.
things going. Get it going. One thing with the anger that I see in our community, like I say, I speak to everybody, and you'll be surprised when you speak to someone and you're smiling. They're surprised. On what did you say? I said, how you doing, black man? Older guy says that to a younger guy that like it. It kind of breaks the ice. But what I've noticed is in our community, we have this real. You see it where there's this gangster mentality. Where folks are just angry. They look. Sometimes they look like the ones that are perpetrating crime. This is, just that hip hop. I hate to put hip hop into it because of music, but the music and all of these things that I think around music and movies and how we glorify the gangster at times. It seems to me that we get a lot of folks that, well, you know what? I'm going to go into another field. I'm going to go out here and hustle. I'm going to do something different rather than go to a 9 to 5, and it makes people angry. It keeps violence going. What do we do about that? Does music and film have anything to do with glorifying actually what happens in our community?
If leadership comes from the community, and this is something that we feel deeply about, we feel strongly about, that we feel as if hip hop, rap, or whatever is something that has permeated the process, the problem, that we have a right to talk about. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment, and rappers can rap about anything they want. But we do have to have a conversation. We do have to talk about, again, man, it's all about linking everything
Sure.
up. You talk about we don't have men involved. I'm talking about we don't have resources. Think about these young kids, these young brothers, have absolutely no idea who to talk to. And I can speak for my generation.
Sure.
Because historically, our lessons are passed down.
Mm-hmm.
They're passed down. And we haven't done that. So these kids have no idea who to talk to. And they have no idea who to trust. Or they have no idea to believe in. And I totally understand that. And I think that if we go into this Dr. King's birthday thing,
Mm-hmm.
this is some of the ground that we can address, because, Tracy, no one's addressing it.
Sure.
No one's addressing it. We don't talk about the plight of the black neighborhood organizations. We helped get started the Black Directors Association. There's
Sure.
about 75.
That's a
Directors.
That's a good idea. Black Directors Organization.
Yeah,
That's
we
a good
do.
idea.
But half of those groups, half of them we have people working from the goodness of their hearts, because
Sure.
they're not funded.
Sure.
They're not funded. The funding has dried up to the point where even if they wanted to provide the most basic service, if they want to provide the most basic service of counseling to women, even if they wanted to be about the business of coming up with alternatives to young people, they have the will, they have the passion.
Sure.
Many of them have the skills, but they don't have the resources to do it.
And I know we keep going back to that, but I
know,
want to.
bro. I gotta keep riding on that, bro.
You
I
know
gotta
all
keep
the
riding,
time
bro. I
about
gotta
that
keep
money. But I want to bring this up to my fellas, to fellas in Boston, my good friends, locally and nationally, that are doing well. I got a buddy out in New York, Paul Hood. My fraternity brother, consistently working in the community, coaching, doing other things. But I want to say to my friends, get out there and get involved, fellas. Your impact could make a difference. And I don't want this to sound corny and dry, but it's not until till that violence and to that homicide knocks on somebody's door that they decide to get involved.
Yeah.
And when you see somebody, if you've ever driven by a homicide scene, and if you ever seen it, that's too close for you to be connected. Just driving by it, you don't want that to happen to you. And if you're in a neighborhood in any urban environment, it's there. Get out there, get involved one way or another. And some of you fellas would rather work with those high risk, tough dudes that carry them things. that sell drugs. We need you to get engaged to help us stop this problem, because when it knocks on the doors of family and friends, it's too late for us at that time to do what we could have done to save a life. You know, in other cities, in New York and Detroit, some of these larger cities, you still have these larger than life older guys that are on the streets doing their thing and have been around for a while.
Yeah.
Is that part of the plan? I mean, do we need these older hustlers? And I know they stayed underground for so long. It's how they seem to maintain, but we need to have some order in regards to what's happening.
I mean, most of these brothers who you're talking about have been there. And one of the great things about the aging process is you acquire knowledge and you acquire maturity. And, you know, when I was the administrative director of the Philadelphia Anti-Drug Anti-Violence Network, we had about 400 people on our staff who were former gang members, who were former gangbangers, you know, who decided to go the other way, decided to be a force for good and progress. And I'm sorry.
Not yours. Looking at the producer. Looking at the producer.
Right. You know, who decided to be a force for good and progress, right? And they became the eyes and ears for people. But not just that, too. They became the real life guidance counselors that these kids never had. You know, we know when we were doing Corey reform work here, you know, the young bucks listened to the old heads who were in the joint. And they were, Darren Howell did an amazing job, you know, until the department.
Who'd you say?
Darren Howell did an amazing job of, you know, he went to the prisons and got, you know, and had videos and things of that nature where lifers got to talk to these kids, right? And he brought it back and he educated folks like that. And
you would think too that, you know, I'm watching.
Val Patrick stopped that, but
I'm watching the news at times, and I see a young man, 22, 23, 24, arrested for murder. The first thing that comes to my mind when I see that is, you're never coming home.
You're never coming home.
You're never coming home again. You will be behind that wall for the rest of your life, 40 to 50 years. I would think to myself, if I saw that, I'm like, what? You know what? I got to get a gig. I got to get a job. This is not going to be my life. And when you mess with those guns, eventually it's coming to you. What, you know, in a way, I hate to say it, but in my opinion, is law enforcement out here is doing everything they can. I want to say I think the youth serving organizations that work with this population have to do more. And we have to, and they need more support in order to get things done. But my thing is, I remember at one time there was a stop and frisk policy that infuriated a lot of people in the community. It was an aggressive form of law enforcement.
Tracy, wasn't that after that white man shot and killed his wife who was pregnant and then blamed a black
the whole community.
You know, Charles Stewart. You know, the thing about that was,
okay.
I'm gonna tell you, I really believed it at one point when it first happened. I thought that a black man may have attacked this woman in the community. That was my thought, and I think I become conditioned because I've been working around violence so much. But stop and frisk. You know what? My thing is, I'm tired of murders. Community policing works if the community
is engaged,
communicates back with law enforcement, points out the problems in your community, make sure that guns are not going to be tolerated. If you see something, you report it, and we stick together to support that person.
And it has to be a two-way street.
So, but we want our elected officials to do more. You know, didn't you have a unit like the gang unit? They're much more aggressive. They're aggressive style of policing, but I've also had those brothers that work in that department bring gang members to me at times saying, Trace, give this guy a job. So he needs an opportunity because it's part of community policing. What about it? Is stop and frisk? You know, does that make people feel better if they just started frisking these young boys that look like gang members? Some mistakes are going to be made. It's going to happen.
One of the dilemmas that I think exists is that the media is in business to sell papers, you know, to sell advertisements. And so don't think that these problems don't exist in white world. Don't think these problems don't exist in Latino world, but we sell newspapers for them.
It's old news, though. Black's killing black is old news.
It's old news, but it sells. Okay, people who live in Wellesley are like, well, gee, I'm so glad I don't live in that neighborhood. But, right? But that's what they sell. So what this whole conversation has been about today, my brother, has been just over the last 45 minutes or so, we have recollected everything that we have learned. Mm-hmm. All the things that we have learned in the last 25, 30, 40 years, maybe even longer, of the things that we've got. What black people have gotten is they've gotten appeasement. Okay, we haven't got, we haven't got real economic opportunity, but we'll give you a job. We still don't have the labor unions open up to us, even though we have a mayor who supposedly loves us all.
Come on, man. He loves us. He loves black people.
He loves us all.
He loves black people.
He loves us all.
He sure does.
And he loves taking selfies.
He sure does.
And he loves taking, but except his friend.
Come on, man. You know about this. Here we go.
No. I just think. No, I think one of the things that you got to do, and that's what you've been doing, Tracy, for the last 45 minutes. You've been speaking your truth. We don't make change until we start being honest about stuff, either real or imagined, perception or reality. Whatever the case may be, we have to speak truth.
But but speaking truth, then we have to take action.
And you take action.
Is this issue now as big as the civil rights movement of the 60s? Is this issue of black kids, children, young adults killing each other nationally? Wherever you see a black urban community, there are murders. This is ridiculous. Is this as big as the civil rights movement? And if so, where are our radical movements to make changes to this problem?
We're all over the place, brother. And that's that's by design. Unemployment is by design. I mean, everything that we're going through is by design because we can't focus on anything. What I love about Pastor Wall's statement that he made a few minutes ago is that he is willing to allow people to come in. This is something, Tracy, that we can come back in here and on January 15th, if he's still willing to do it by then, to bring folks in, allow us to all accumulate that level of knowledge that we have, the history that we got, because we all got history down. We all have seen this, we have fought it. You're still fighting it.
Still.
You've been doing it forever. I mean, I was doing this when I had hair. Okay, Pastor Wall was doing this before he was white. Yeah. We've all been doing this for a while, and so maybe. I mean, there's a lot of things coming up. 2020 is the probably the most important election of our lives in this country's history. That's coming up. The 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. Is 2020, and we've lost 85% of it because of Republicans.
Okay, but here we go again. Now, is this bigger than the civil rights movement? And let me tell you why. Because the civil rights movement was around a couple of issues around women's rights and around voting. What happened? All of that fight, and we don't vote. All right. So you know what? If you're not going to vote, you're not going to come out and deal with these issues in your own community. Where does the black community go when it comes to black on black crime? Where do we go from here?
I think, and to answer your question, is as big as we've literally buried hundreds of thousands of our children for no reason other than other than a street.
Exactly.
Over a sewer. That's what we've killed our kids, but we've buried children for that. Mothers are disturbed because of that. People are crazy because of what has happened. And you talked about voting. Well, one of the dilemmas is that we sold people on the idea we vote, things will change.
Sure.
Change doesn't work that quickly.
Sure.
And so ultimately what happened was that people decided, this obviously doesn't work for us. So again, we have to do a better job. We have to do a better job, once again, of trying to bring people back. And in that vein, we should be talking about, you and I are going to sit down and plot out this thing, because I think for Boston, we need to do that.
Sure.
We need to do that for the, NAACP's coming here in July or August.
Sure.
We have things to do. And I think that we have trafficking, we have our kids,
sure,
we have our public education system, we have all that. There's something to talk about.
So, with the exception of Cheryl being on this panel, I guess one of the last questions we have, because we're running out of time, is what do white folks think about what's happening in the black community? How do they look at how folks are living? I mean, the majority of us are doing well. Let's be correct here on what we're talking about. Majority of us are doing well, but what do you think The public
perception that they have is that thank God I don't live there.
You know what though? But let's take this into consideration. What about all the white folks now that are moving into Roxbury? When I think about this conversation, I'm like, they're bold. They're bold. You know, they're coming into basically all they see is media-wise about shootings and the negative things about Roxbury. But that's a big move to move into an area where you're not accustomed to and there's violence occurring. Cheryl, really quickly.
You know what I was going to say is I think the Roxbury community has to take responsibility, and it's an attitude. Like, I just want to speak towards when I call like 911, the first thing they'll say, if I say, well, I heard gunshots in such and such an area, they'll say, well, what do you expect? You live in Roxbury. Like, that's not the kind of
Someone
attitude.
said that to you?
Yes.
That's the police, man.
Wow.
And they always say that, and we had an issue with that.
Well, police are doing good stuff.
And recently on Warren Street in Dudley, I had seen someone overdosing, and I called them, and ring, and they never call me back.
All right, I'm sorry, Cheryl,
30 minutes later, they call me back. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you.
The theme music is on. That means we've run out of time. I want to thank my man, black man, Horace Small, for coming out today and doing his thing. He gave us a true perspective. As you can see, Trump is his boy. If you heard the conversation, that is Horace's boy, Trump. That is his boy.
Don't believe that.
I want to thank you for coming, Horace. I want to thank all our listeners and all the viewers. As James would say, keep knocking, keep rocking. I holla. Take care, everybody.